One of those things that you have to forget. You always have these connotations, these things that you've experienced in your real world life. Even if you have bought a house, you're going to be thinking about like, well, I got my deed when I closed on my house and it was this. Yes, it was that. And yes, we normally do this, but it's not what's going to be on the test. When we say a deed, we talk about the elements that are necessary for it to be a valid deed. And there are some things that your brain wants to assume that they are, but they are not, like recorded, notarized. Those are not essential elements. If you see a question, if Seth took a deed, right? I have a property in Georgia and I signed a deed and I wrote it down and I put an adequate legal description and I put adequate words of conveyance and I stated that there was consideration on there and I drafted up this deed. I named John the grantee and I have legal capacity. I'm of legal age, and I'm sane, and I do all these things, but I never tell John about it. And I just put it in my safe, and then I kick the bucket. And then my kids find it when they're cleaning out my safe. Does John own my property? No, because it was never delivered and voluntarily accepted. I never told John about it. He doesn't know. If you're missing one of these elements, it is not a valid deed. You have to have all of these for it to be valid, but it does never have to be recorded. We consider recordation constructive notice. When you record something at the Register of Deeds, the Register of Deeds is a public record. So if I wanted to know who owned 123 Main Street, I can go down to the Register of Deeds. I can look up the current owner of record for 123 Main Street, and that is considered constructive notice that that person probably is the owner of record. There is no guarantee. Deeds, remember, show way of transferring title. You do not have a title. It is just where you have transferred title by way of a deed. It shows that the property was sold or exchanged or transferred. That's what a deed does. We record it to provide notice to the public that we're probably the owner of record, and we record it to protect ourselves against third-party interest, somebody claiming superior title. But be very careful because the questions may ask, is it a valid deed? And if it has these things, it absolutely is. Folks, if it was written on a napkin, it would still be valid if it contained all of these different things. You've got to understand that properties were transferred over the past hundreds of years. This is not a new concept, this land ownership. It's been happening for a while. The courthouse may not have even existed, and even if it did, it may have been 20 miles away, which is a long way to go on a horse. So what used to happen is people would sell each other land, and then the next time they went into town, may record it or take it to the courthouse. We never got rid of these rules. It's still valid if you do everything the way that it's supposed to be done. But then you would ultimately want to record it to make it enforceable against third-party claims. Whose claims? The previous owner and any other person who may try to claim it. If I buy property from Stephen and he gives me a deed, but I don't record it, but his deed is recorded, if you go down to the courthouse, it still looks like Stephen owns it, even though I know and Stephen knows that he doesn't. But that could entice him to commit fraud, right? He could go and try to sell it to somebody else because he looks like the owner still. So deeds, you've got to understand that deeds, writing, legal capacity of the grantor, right? The giver of the property has to be 18, sane and sober. Grantor and grantee have to be identified. Adequate words of conveyance. When we say adequate words of conveyance, it just says, does hereby bargain, exchange, grant, convey, and whatever, right? That's the kind of verbiage we use. Legally sufficient consideration. Folks, consideration is just something of value. Sometimes we transfer property for love and affection. That is something of value. In a divorce, in a relationship, in an exchange, has to have something of value, which you typically does not require the amount. You don't ever have to say the amount of consideration that you got on a deed. It typically says for $10 and other valuable considerations, the receipt of which is hereby acknowledged. Signed by the grantor. Grantee, we don't need their signatures, just the grantor. And then it has to be delivered and voluntarily accepted. You at least have to tell the grantee. They may not have to have a physical copy of the deed, but they have to have been notified that you have drafted that up in their name. If you've not notified them and or did not hand it to them, then you're lacking an essential element. Does not have to be witnessed, does not have to be dated, does not have to state the amount of consideration, does not have to be acknowledged. Acknowledged is just a fancy legal word for notarized, does not have to be recorded, and does not have to be sealed, aka signed under a seal. Now, don't get confused. A deed does have to be notarized in order to be recorded. That's where a lot of people get confused. When you buy a house, it does get recorded, right? The attorney records your deed. It'd be a stupid idea not to. But from a legal point of view, we're not worried about what's stupid versus not stupid. We're about what's the law. Can you have a valid deed without doing this? And the answer is yes. But if you're recording it, it does have to be notarized. Some of these items are required for it to be recorded, but not required for it to be valid. You've got to be very careful about what the test is asking you, because there are a lot of concepts that sound similar. Valid, void, and voidable exist for both contracts and deeds. So you've always got to pay attention on the test. Are we talking about a deed or are we talking about a contract, which are very different things?
If you like this video, feel free to share it with a friend. For more real estate education content, please subscribe to the channel. From all of us at Seacoast Real Estate Academy, thank you for watching.